Hello again. Like many white people in Britain, I suspect, I am sick and tired of hearing about the transatlantic slave trade. Most nations and peoples have episodes in their past when they were unfairly treated or used cruelly. This applies to the English just as it does to the Irish, to many Africans as it does to Indians, the Caribbeans in the same way that it does to the Arabs. Of course, Indians and Arabs have now thrown off the past. They do not wish to dwell on the times when they were ruled by other nations. The same applies to the English and Irish. For people of Caribbean heritage, though, there is a desperate desire to hang on to their grudge and milk it for all that it's worth. This is because, with all the talk of reparations, that ancient grudge might be their meal ticket for the future. And so there is no incentive to forget about it and just get on with their lives. I have never in my life heard an Indian complain about the Raj and the way that so many Indians left their country in past centuries almost as slaves. They're too busy now working for the future to nurse a grievance for something which happened centuries ago. Not so the Caribbeans, of course. There is, though, a problem when it comes to Caribbeans and the transatlantic slave trade. And this is that hardly any of them know what it was or what it entailed. All they have are weird and fanciful old wives' tales, propagated by people as ignorant as they are themselves of their own history. Here are two tremendously popular books written by people of Caribbean heritage and intended to explain Black history to people. This one is by a company called the Black Curriculum. It's aimed at children. You almost certainly it'll be in your local children's library. It's in an awful lot of schools as well. There's two sequels to this coming out shortly. Dorling Kindersley are publishing them in the autumn, written by the same people. This one, of course, is why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. This was a bestseller. These books are valued by Black people for teaching what is supposed to be the truth about the Black experience. The transatlantic slave trade, or triangular trade, can be summed up very easily. We sent boats from English ports to West Africa, and these boats were loaded with manufactured goods such as cloth, guns, mirrors, and so on. When we reached Africa, we exchanged those things with chiefs and kings for slaves whom they had captured for us. We took these to the Americas and then traded them for things like sugar, cotton, and tobacco. These were brought back to English ports, sold, and with the proceeds, more manufactured goods were uh, purchased, and the cycle began again. And very profitable it was too. There now, that is simple enough, or so you might think. Let's turn to pages 18 and 19 of this Black Curriculum book, which, as I say, is in many schools and libraries. Allow me to quote. People from different countries in Europe, including Portugal, France, and Spain, would go to African countries and swap items like gold, ivory, and spices for enslaved African people. And here we have an illustration of the triangular trade. And it says here ships would sail from Europe to Africa carrying goods such as spices. Now, this is completely bonkers. The idea that Europe was exporting ivory to Africa. Where are the elephants, do you think? Oh, yes, they're in Africa. That's where the ivory comes from. According to this book, and the same thing, of course, goes with the spices, there was a big spice trade with the Far East. We weren't growing spices in Europe and exporting them to Africa. I mean, the whole idea that we in Europe were exporting ivory to Africa is so peculiar. Ivory was very useful. There was a limitless appetite for ivory in this country. We needed an awful lot of it in the 19th century. It could be carved into ornaments, used for jewellery and combs, inlaid into wood to decorate furniture. We take plastic so much for granted that perhaps we seldom stop to ask ourselves what the Victorians would have used for piano keys or billiard balls. For thousands of years, ivory was seen as one of the most versatile materials in the world, which of course accounts for the fact that elephants have in the past been driven almost to extinction. The idea that we in Europe were exporting ivory to Africa tells me that whoever wrote this book knows literally nothing about the transatlantic slave trade, which is a sobering idea. And what's more, although they are abominably ignorant about it, they are determined to spread their ignorance to children. Shocking. Let's look at this best-selling book. I'm going to quote now from page 2. The author says that she didn't know about the slave trade, and then someone told her about it at university, and she went to visit Liverpool, taking a trip to Liverpool. Liverpool had been Britain's biggest slave port. 1.5 million African people had passed through the city's. Well, let's think about that for a moment. Cotton passed through Liverpool, so did sugar and tobacco. They were brought here from the Americas. Ships were loaded here with cloth and various manufactured goods. Why on earth would anybody have suddenly reversed the flow of the triangular trade and brought 1.5 million slaves to Liverpool? The author of this book, like the one I quoted from earlier, knows nothing at all about the transatlantic slave trade. The awful thing here is that slavery seems to be so central to the identity of both Caribbeans and African Americans, and yet there is no particular interest in finding out about it, in knowing what actually happened. It is almost as though it's simply a convenient story which may be used to extort money from gullible white people who can be manipulated into feeling guilty about something which happened hundreds of years ago and in which they were not involved. The actual facts do not seem to matter in the slightest.